Welcome to the Embodiment Matters podcast with me, Erin Giesemann-Rabke, and my beloved Carl Rabke. We don't have the luxury of living in ordinary times, but rather we live in extraordinary ones where the way we live in the next decade will make a huge difference in the future of life on planet Earth. We aspire in this tapestry of rich conversations drawn from a variety of wise perspectives to share resources to help you embody the wisdom, compassion, and skillful actions that are needed during these times. You can find out more about our classes and sign up for our newsletter at embodimentmatters.com. You can also become a supporting member of our podcast with a small monthly donation. Look for Embodiment Matters at patreon.com. Hello, listener friends. It's Erin here, and I'm so excited to share this conversation with you. Carl and I had the pleasure of talking with Reverend Angel Kyodo Williams and Dr. Scott Lyons. And we started this conversation talking about embodiment and social justice and how these weave together. Together they are hosting the Embodied Social Justice Certification Program along with many other amazing teachers. So, of course, we talked about many favorite topics. The highly contagious nature of reactivity, spiritual bypassing, soft bellies, ways of perceiving our world as influenced by our conditioning and our use of language, and the skills that support us in doing the deep and necessary work of becoming embodied and co-creating a better world for all. We got to dive into talking about liberation and cancel culture, the practice of minding our own business, and the essential foundation of contemplative and somatic practices for doing any kind of racial healing work. These are two wonderful human beings and skilled teachers, and we think you're going to love this rich conversation as much as we did. You can learn more about this embodied social justice training by going to theembodied-social-justice-certificate. And if you didn't catch all that, you can look at our show notes or just Google Embodied Social Justice Certificate. Dr. Scott Lyons is dedicated to teaching embodiment as a way of exploring human development, healing, growth, and transformation. His deep passion is to integrate somatic practices, transpersonal inquiry, and scholarly research into the creative and healing arts. Scott is a clinical psychologist, an osteopath, and a mind-body medicine practitioner who specializes in therapies for infants, youth, and adults. You can find more about him at drscottlyons.com, theembodylab.com, and on Instagram at Drscottlyons, Lyons. Reverend Angel Kyodo Williams is a writer, an activist, an ordained Zen priest, and the author of Being Black, Zen and the Art of Living with Fearlessness and Grace, published by Viking Press in 2000, and the co-author of Radical Dharma, Talking Race, Love, and Liberation, published by North Atlantic Books. You can find out more at angelkyodowilliams.com, transformativechange.org, or radicaldharma.org, and you'll find all those links in our show notes. Enjoy the conversation. So welcome, Reverend Angel and Dr. Scott Lyons. We're so excited to be here with you today. We love to start these conversations by asking what turns out to be a really rich question about what is embodiment? How do you define that? And maybe we'll start with Reverend Angel and then hear from Dr. Scott.
Oh, that's not fair. Scott is the embodiment guy. I think there are actually multiple layers of like what we talk when we say embodiment. I think that there's the most kind of like surface idea is that whatever it is that is actually true, that we are a living expression of it. We're expressing our authentic self. That what we choose to inhabit and that we aspire to, that we're actually showing up in that way in a space. But there's also the fact that there are things that we have been practicing without being conscious about it, and we're embodying those things as well. And so I think that embodiment, then we're talking about that aspect of like, how do we actually express, not from a theoretical place, not the theories of problem, right? Not even from just a politically, sort of a political ideology or ideological place, but how do we actually express something through the body? How does the body become the agent of our expression of whatever it is we're talking about embodying?
Mm-hmm. Scott, you want to add on to that?
Yeah. Thank you, Reverend, for just naming the layers. Because I think even within, the community of embodiment, we can get really like focused on just the body as embodiment. And I'd love to come back to that in terms of the, my own history and our conversations around the ideas of embodiment. But, embodiment for me is this, as Rev was saying, like this shift from the conceptual back to the felt sense experience. It is re-inhabiting our primal language of sensation, feeling, breath. And whatever the reasons were that we moved away from this primal language, we have these embodiment technologies or tools to come back to this very primal language of sensation, feeling, breath. And to me, that is the process of embodiment, is to re-inhabit that, or to feel re-inhabited by anything that took us away from that primal experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I would love to take this and connect it to the topic of this upcoming training of the connection of embodiment and social justice. And Rev, in the call about the training, when you said, how has this not happened before? That it seems like, how has it not come together? Because they're so intimately connected. So I'd love to hear each of you reflect on where the connection of embodiment and social justice lies.
Well, for me, I think we don't have a social justice quite precisely because we don't have embodiment. I think that is part of the inherent not only problem, but if you kind of scroll it back further, that it's been the design of Western Eurocentric culture to disembody people and to have a kind of program of disembodiment that allows for, I like to say, untenable things to happen. So that really, if you trust, as I do, that fundamentally we're connected, we're compassionate, we're curious about each other. If that's our fundamental state, then it is when we're disembodied, whether by the experience of fear, right, that pulls us out of our body, a kind of like overexpressed sense of fear that pulls us out of touch with ourselves, or it is systematically done by the laws, the practices, the social norms, so that people can abide by. So a very coarse example, but also a very potent example is, by creating a religious narrative of people being heathens or barbarians, then it makes the theft of their lands, right, and the kind of like march across their territory and the taking of their lands okay to do, because now we're disembodied from the felt sense of another human being and the impact on those human beings, and hence we have the entire North American continent and much of the South American, the Western Hemisphere at large. And that's a result of the systematic disembodiment of peoples vis-a-vis a religious ideology. Right. And in that religious ideology, and many, I'm not poking fun at one of them, but many of them, necessitated a disembodiment so that they can have like priests and mediators of people's relationship to the divine. And so those mediators of the relationship to the divine, and then made the body dirty. And, and so knowing the body and being intimate with the body other than anything just for procreation, and then you kind of sneak off to actually enjoy the body, right? All of that is a program of disembodiment, right? And then it has been corporatized, in the form of capitalism and in this country, that then makes, our kind of a devout obligation to the deity of money, and therefore we can displace human beings from the countries that they inhabit, because they don't actually belong to a country. I even talk about the fact that, there was scientifically named many people from where they came from, right? There are Australoids and there are Mongoloids, and those were the names of their continents, but they named Black peoples like just Negroid, which is not a place, and that's a disembodiment, right? So there's disembodiment in the people that allow things to happen and witness, and there's a disembodiment of peoples, that also things can be allowed to happen to them, because if people are not from a place, then they can be displaced, and that's a disembodiment. And so it's very right. It's like it's a program, rather than, and I think this is really important, because the other side of embodiment is because we can feel some kind of like shame that there's something wrong with us, rather than recognizing like, oh, there's actually a bit of program that's not like some human being right now systematically looking at you doing something to you, but it's in the water, it's in the culture. Mm-hmm. And so for those of us that feel like, ooh, I think I might be a little disembodied, no shame, but the recognition of like something has happened, right? There has been disembodiment. We're naturally embodied as humans. Mm-hmm. That's actually natural for us. You can see it in animals; they're embodied. So that project of disembodiment is something that we want to bring right, and from there, justice will emerge organically, because the human system won't tolerate, right? An embodied human system won't tolerate the kind of injustice that we see.
So beautifully said. Scott, do you want to add on to that?
No. That's so good. I'll share a little bit, maybe from a personal perspective. I entered really young into the world of embodiment and somatics. I accidentally landed in a class at the university when I was 15 called Body-Mind Centering. And, it was the last class that I could possibly enroll in, and I had to enroll in classes. And it changed everything. And it began this, this journey of continuing to explore and develop what this process of embodiment is. And I saw this I experienced my own transformation. And from not being able, to having severe dyslexia and disembodied, constantly dissociated, constantly, to being able to feel comfortable and safe within my own skin, and then safe in relation to other people. And it was by my mid to late 20s when I felt like, oh, I landed, I arrived, I'm embodied, whatever that means. And then this question kept arising of like, that's it? Like, okay, I'm here, now what? And that really plagued me. Like, okay, it's cool, like this, but the techniques and the tools started to feel somewhat empty to me. And when I met Reverend Angel and Ray Johnson and other folks who have really been diving in and sharing these embodied social justice, it felt like, finally that ache of what else is there? This doesn't feel like enough suddenly got answered. that hole felt filled. And it was like, oh, I don't even know why I never really asked the question, well, why aren't we embodied? Like it took so long to just get to that point of feeling okay to inhabit myself that I never even asked that question. And when that question really got asked, it felt so much more satisfying and life affirming to start to turn towards like, well, it's not just the tools to get embodied, but it's also what in our history, what are the ways structures and organizations and schools and the medical system and everything else is contributing to this disembodiment.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly in that, there was a sense of empowerment that I hadn't ever experienced from just inhabiting myself. And so that for me was, started this significant journey, which I still feel like I'm a big student on, but I love the conversations about, unpacking the very layered and complex ways that our systems are continuously disembodying us, disempowering us from this beautiful gift of being inhabited and fully alive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, that you really can't have embodiment without intimately being with the realities of the relational field that we're in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I would love to read something from your wonderful On Being interview, Reverend Angel, that is, such an embodied phrase that I love. And then I want to ask you both to talk about this in relation to cancel culture and see what comes about that. So you said, but without this particular place and location of a willingness to be flexible, open, soft-bellied enough to be moved by the truth of the other in whatever given situation, then it's not transformative. Soft-bellied is so important, I appreciate that so deeply. So there's so much paradox in this of how to be mindful of causes of harm. Mm-hmm. And there's something about when you speak about love in the movement, how it's grounded in this understanding of liberation, it's really different from the kind of spiritual bypassing that just wants to jump to love without wading through the muck of history and all the sensations we're avoiding, which is why we harden our bellies and, are disembodied. So anything you want to riff on that, I'd love to hear.
Mm-hmm. It's funny, the moment that you said, the things that we don't want to hear, mm-hmm. I was actively, like I took a breath and expanded my belly. Mm-hmm. And as I was doing that, I was like, and as I was doing that, you said hardening our belly. and so there it is, the systems again, and the warding off of life, right? The warding off of life and the warding off of the truth, mm-hmm. that results in contraction in our bodies. That and when we're inhabiting our bodies, that's what I mean. That's what becomes intolerable, right? And so when we're inhabiting our bodies, that warding off, right, becomes intolerable because we feel it. And because we feel it, we, I don't want to say we have to navigate it, but our life starts to depend on navigating it. Our sense of life, our sense of being alive becomes dependent on navigating it. So we're not addressing and, like loving people because, kumbaya, and it's like, that's all the rage. And that's the right thing to do, but rather because it's intolerable to not. It's intolerable. And for me, I often think my approach is to make it intolerable, right? Mm-hmm. to raise up the level and the intensity, to turn people towards their own bodies, not to make some political reality intolerable, but to make, because apparently so many injustices are tolerable to people. So my question becomes like, how is that tolerable? Like, how do you tolerate that? How do you, I mean, and I can live with the discomfort of it, right? So that's different, right? So I could live with the discomfort because I'm doing so, like right now, there's all sorts of injustice, right? And it feels alive in me. I'm not warding it off. I'm tolerating discomfort. And actually, it's part of how Scott and I met. I went to Embodied Yoga conference. And one of the tenets for me of what yoga is about is actually learning to tolerate discomfort, right? Not to bypass it, though. That actually, to tolerate it is actually to be able to receive it and to I think of it as kind of like redistributing the force of it. Right. So that I'm not disabled from the impact. Right. But rather I'm enlivened by the impact and by the truth. And right at the beginning, Erin, you said, this, like, it's a paradox. And I think that all truth, all capital T truth, is a paradox. It's kind of how you know it's a truth, is that it is a paradox. And that's the giveaway. And if it's clean and straightforward and it just yeah, probably it could be a truth. It could be a truth, it could be little t truth, but it's not likely the capital T truth that for all of us invites the complexity of what it means to be human, to be able to hold people as other soft-bellied creatures that have the burden of systems that have shaped them in a way, right? Systematically disembodied them, to hold that, like, they're in there, right? Even as they're complicit in aggression, even as they're complicit in violent systems, even as there is a part of the complexity. But it's not ideological, right? It's not like, oh, I need to hold them. It's a nice place to start. It's in the body, so that it makes it intolerable for me to cancel people in the way that has become a part of our unfortunate rite of passage as people scramble to try to bring, and it's understandable, because the only systems that we're taught from are systems of dominance. And so our responses are domination, right? So we have dominant responses to, and until we embody, we won't know that. And so that's why this is valuable also for the people that are about social justice. And they're like, already, they're just like, yeah, well, I'm in my body. I'm Black, I'm brown. I had no choice to be in this body. I've been abused. I have no choice. I'm trans. A lot of us that are marginalized in relationship to dominant culture feel that we're already embodied. Hey, but guess what? We're shaped inside of these cultures. And so the responses that we have to our marginalization, to the domination that we experience, are going to be dominant ones, unless we actually source our wisdom from someplace else. And I think that the only place that can be is the body.
Cancel culture. Yeah. It's this weird thing of, even like, I get nervous talking about it because I'm like, ooh, am I going to be canceled for talking about cancel culture? And there's like this eggshell experience of wanting to talk about, how do we express when we have felt hurt? And in doing so, not dehumanize another person for their humanness of hurting other people. Like, if we recognize that it is in part of the paradox or complexity of being human is we make mistakes, and we carry our own traumas, and we carry our own confusion, and we carry our own systemic compression and colonization and misunderstandings that land in the cells of our body so deeply that we cannot see or feel or hear the hurt that we might be creating. Mm-hmm. And to be able to navigate and, as Rev was saying, tolerate and be with the hurt that is present, or the pain, or the what has been remembered or triggered, we could say, from what has happened, how we can be with all of that and still work towards seeing the human that has been part of that story that is now happening. And that's fucking hard.
Yeah.
Oh, can I swear on the podcast?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's fucking hard.
You're gonna get canceled for that one.
And I get it. And as Rev saying, like, there has to be a certain amount of tolerance and safety within our own being to be able to have that spaciousness. And that's a privilege. And not one that has been given to most people. And so it is this complexity, this paradox of how do we invite more contact with the pain and the traumas and the joys and the beauties that is in this being, that then gives us the space to be in relation with another being, even when they are being their human self and possibly causing hurt.
Mm-hmm. It seems so important to have pathways of repair for the harm doers, but it's often a missing piece, it seems.
Yeah, I mean, rupture and repair are developmental process. Mm-hmm. We look at it in our fundamental relationships from any perspective, and rupture and repair are present. And it's, we can think of rupture, and it sounds like a really intense word, but it's how relationships also grow. It's how we grow. It's how when we reconnect through the repair work, there's a way in which we can feel what it's like to have that much more clarity of what relationship feels like. Sometimes we need its opposite to feel its clarity in that way. Mm-hmm. And when rupture happens, it happens even with the best intentions, but it's in the repair work that I think deep healing and resilience can happen. Mm-hmm. And when rupture is, when that very primal thing of rupture starts to be shamed at in a way that it doesn't allow us to do the repair work, which then is where the deep healing and resilience can come from. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we just, for whatever reason, we're so in our story, in the pain, that we won't allow for the repair work to happen, even though we demand it or say it or desire it on some level.
Yeah.
Because to be in the healing and the repair means that we will have to feel.
It takes courage to feel, right? There's everything we've been avoiding, right? Is right in there when we pause to feel it. I'm thinking of another paradox, and this saying I refer to a lot for myself when I'm in a teacher facilitator role. And I heard this first from Stephen Levine. I've heard it attributed to many different people, including Banksy, the artist. But the way I heard Stephen say it, he said, the role of a skillful spiritual teacher is to comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable. And I think that's true in a simultaneous way inside ourselves, to comfort our disturbed parts, to disturb our comfortable parts. So I'm curious to hear both of you speak to what are the skills in embodiment that you think are important for people to be able to engage this kind of work, this deep, courageous healing, both in social justice, but also how human beings live on the earth, the same, I'm thinking of your word, Reverend Angel, about just what's intolerable. And it is so clear. Oh my God, clear cutting, mountaintop mining, it's intolerable if we're present to our own experience of it. So what do we need? What kind of skills do we need to be able to have the courage to feel or be disturbed or let that in and respond skillfully?
Yeah, when you said, when you said clear cutting, right? Like I had a visceral response.
Yeah.
Right. And you said like mountaintop, like it's like I have a visceral response. And that's signs of life.
Yeah.
That's signs of health. And so being able to allow that is a skill, right? Being able to allow that and not ward it off or hang out in my head about it and kind of making mental stories about it and kind of leaving it there and not letting that whoosh of like, oof, touch me. It is itself a skill. And I want to lift up something Scott said and say that part of the journey of being able to do any kind of repair work, I don't think Scott meant it this way, but I want to make sure it's clear for people that are listening. People that have been harmed and been systemically harmed, it's not necessarily their work to go and like do healing with, like it's not like, oh, like now let's, do some forgiveness with people's even that they feel have harmed them. Because part of the skill is actually to have enough of and I kind of go back to yoga with this, like a steady, comfortable seat with yourself, right? To have a steady, comfortable seat and a trust in yourself, an abiding trust in yourself that enables us to be able to meet the world in its complexity, right? And I think that teaching that skill and having that be something as a part of, and it's not a skill like a put it in your pocket and then done skill. It is an ongoing unfolding, multi-layered, rich experience of, you think you're feeling, and then it's like, woo, and now there's a new layer of feeling and you keep surfacing things. So I think, I don't know if this is so much about a skill, but about a way of entering its willingness, right? And so to develop willingness, and I think willingness and trust are related to each other. There's like a little bit of willingness, you find some trust, with the trust, you develop more willingness. And so it's this circular reference that builds upon itself. And so I think that's critical. And another, and I'll let Scott say, another skill I believe is critical is actually to be able to, I like to say, like, to mind your business. I feel like in the process, we're sort of so bombarded with needing to be right. Speaking of cancel culture, needing to be right and needing to have the, get out there and like say all the right things about, the political realities or the social realities and so on. There's actually a period of time that one needs to mind your own business and like pay attention to what's going on for you, because our systems have been so corrupted by external ideas, we don't even know what's ours, right? And so even our reactivity is not necessarily ours. It's, what we've been trained to do. And if you don't believe that, you can just say it's very unlikely that all of a sudden, millions of people suddenly became aware that what we need to do is start to cancel people. Like, we're just following a trend, we're just sort of riding this thing. And the rage that we feel and sense of being irate, all of that is, I'm not saying that those feelings are not true, but what we do with them, right? As we sort of have surfaced something for ourselves, surfaced, old information about like how not okay, right? The things that happen that the Me Too culture, Me Too movement has responded to. Like, we're surfacing those things, but our response to them, right, is like outward. And we're going and minding other people's business and making, like all of like what should happen, rather than dealing with like what's going on in us. And that's, I think that's critical, is actually to be committed to one's own liberation as a pathway through which we get to collective liberation. And that there's a paradox for you.
Before we hear from Scott, which I'm excited to hear, I would love to ask, when you spoke about willingness and trust in what? Your own responsiveness, trust in safe culture? Like, what are you growing trust in?
Yeah, I've developed this term, all these little hyphenated terms, and one of them is like, your own being, right? Because yourself has so funny connotations. So I could say trust in yourself, but it's your own being, because yourself has been shaped also, right, by the conditions and realities that you, and the time, the temporal time, the region, the culture, and so on. So it's pointing at something that's underneath even like the notion of a self, of a constructed, designed, shaped self that is partial, internal, but also extraordinarily. I mean, we don't have, a dear friend of mine, Greg Snyder, is a Zen teacher, and he says, we don't have an individual self. We have a private self. We are collective. Our so-called self turns out is collective. It doesn't have an entirely any existence that's separate from mutuality, from all of existence. And there's an own what I call it is an own being. In a Zen tradition, we might call it your original face, right? Who you were before your mother was born. That is something pervasive and ancient and alive and present and now all at the same time. So instead of getting to all the woo, I just say it's your own being. And it's not something that can be really spoken about in any way that is satisfactory. It can only be touched and experienced and remembered. It really is, there goes mindfulness, right? It's remembered, right? It gets remembered. It's not something that you get and you acquire, and it's something to, put in your treasure chest. It's remembering who you are. It's remembering who you are. So the trust you're developing is that there's however your directionality is, way down underneath all of the layers of shaping and external an external ideation of who you have to be, that there's something that is so fundamental, out of which you arise and you grow, and you can make some choices for yourself that can be different than what you've been told. So you're developing a trust in that.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Fleshing out. Scott, skills for the journey or whatever else is coming now.
So first, thank you, Rev, for naming that repair work doesn't have to necessarily happen with another person. That repair work can be part of the embodiment process within ourselves. And I'll perhaps speak a little bit more to that as well. I really appreciated the mind your business. And the complexity of that, because, activation, that level of arousal that takes us into action, that is the most contagious state from a physiological perspective. Mm-hmm. From the studies, it's not love, it's not joy, it's not sadness, it's not anger, it is activation arousal. And so minding your own business is complex, because when we are stirred in collective, it is really hard to find your own anchor. And it can be hard to re-find if it wasn't already there, especially. And as we talked about, that disanchoring is part of the systemic issues of taking away our power. And so, I think there's something really important to say in regards to, just to go with what Reverend Angel was saying about like minding your own business, and when we are co-revved up, it is that much harder to come back, as Rev was saying, to our core needs, to our core being, to our core feelings. And that is where healing happens in many places, but especially through the body. And if our attention and our energy is pulled out from us because of this contagious activation, the skill set that we're talking about is being able to can we come back? How do we come back? Can we stay anchored? There's nothing wrong with activation. It's only when it flips us out from us that it becomes unaware often. And perhaps not from the deep integrity that we wish to work from. And I also think, in terms of the repair work, I think that unraveling the systemic conditions, I mean, that's the way I'm particularly interested in, is unraveling the layers to which we have been sort of pushed through I get the image of like pushed through a particular maze where we don't get to make the particular choices of how we might embody or feel the felt sense of our gender or our culture or our body. Yeah. I mean, there's that famous study that was done with cats that I love. I don't love the study, but the information is so clear of like, there were cats born into a room where there were only painted lines on the vertical lines that painted on the walls, another room where they only had vertical lines painted on the wall. And when they swapped rooms, the cats would run into the wall because they couldn't see the edges. They didn't have that. And for me, that's such a clear example of like how in the history of humankind have these vertical lines been painted, and I want to see the horizontal lines.
Yeah.
Like, how do I see that? I mean, that to me is my driver, is like, the history of sex and gender. Ooh, shit. That's just one of so many, that we could talk about, and are so clear about like, in the early 1900s when they discovered that men also, or cis men also produce estrogen. That was hidden because we were in a war, and because it was discovered in America, it might seem to the enemy that American men are weak. Now, flash forward to 2020, when I asked 21, when I asked my niece what she was learning in school, and she was talking about her biology class, and I was like, "Oh, what are you learning in biology?" And she was like, "About sex and gender." And I was like, "Oh, tell me what you are learning, because I'm curious what's being taught now." And she's like, "Oh, well, men have estrogen, men have testosterone, and women have estrogen." And I was like, we are still 100 years later in that type of systemic, disembodiment of our own being. I mean, that might sound so small to some of us, but like, here is an example, and the many, many, many examples in which science is not fact, it's filtered fact. Mm-hmm. And that filtered fact is through the lens of this very particular ideology that continues to shame our body, or to discredit all of the potentiality of our being. I mean, I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole, but like, stress is a beautiful example. Like, what we understand as stress in 2021 is based from almost 100 years ago on a very colonial concept and a very dramatic human being who labeled things about our body.
Yeah.
We are not in constant fight or flight. We are in relationship of moving towards and away from a stimulus. Mm-hmm. And when we de-dramatize the language, for example, we can recognize that we are reacting not to our own being, but to the language and to the ideas and the concepts of the science that have been imposed on our being. Mm-hmm. Sorry, that's my...
Oh, great.
That's juicy.
Yeah, it seems that one profound common denominator of the waters we're swimming in is just this notion of systems of dominance, whether that's white body supremacy, whether that's misogyny, whether that's how we are with thinking mind over our bodies, or how humans are with the living world. And what are some ways, maybe as far as what you're offering in the training of unraveling some of the momentum of systems of dominance?
I think we have to start with the dominance in our own bodies, and that's the project of embodiment, is to be able to develop the grace to say, oh yeah, it's in here. Mm-hmm. And the Einstein quote of like, you can't solve a problem with the same thinking that got you into it. And so therefore, if we are sourced, right, in other words, if our thinking, our imagination about what is possible, how we work with things, how we solve the challenge, right, of dominance comes from dominance, we have to find a different source.
Yeah.
And so while I absolutely understand that it's the long game, if you will, though it has been quickened by the pandemic, and I can say something about that. It is the long game. Maybe it's kind of like medium long now, and just long game, that we have to find a different source. And so for me, the body is that source, right? We have this notion out of the work I developed from my book called Prophetic Praxis. We have these five pillars of Radical Dharma, and it's a framework for liberation. And one of the pillars is prophetic praxis. And prophetic praxis means telling the truth of these times, right? It's like telling the truth. Prophecy is actually not about the future. Prophecy is actually about now. And why people are, feel endangered by so-called prophets is because they're actually revealing what's going on. And it's revealing the fact that actually most of us are living in the past, just like what Scott said. We're living in the past. We are operating in the past with old information, and we can't keep recycling. This is the place that you don't want to recycle, folks. Here's a place that not to recycle. We actually want new information, present information. And our bodies provide that present information unless they get stuck and they loop onto old trauma, right? Like that's like a looping. We're just like looping back on information. We can't, my mom would say, kick the record. Like we can't get out of that like loop and get beyond that like space. And so embodiment, it provides that. It's so like, okay, we can see that we're looping, right? So we have practices, we could see that we're looping. And then out of the practices of seeing we're looping, we can begin to see like the exit from the looping. The exit is actually returning to ourselves instead of the loop. So we come back and we can see ourselves, and then we can trust that. And then that's a more comfortable place to come back to. And then once that's a more comfortable and viable place to come back to, we're like, oh, wow, yeah, this information is old information. Right now we can source from a new place. And if collectively more and more of us are sourcing from a new place, but we're still going to have to figure each other out. We're still humans. We're still going to conflict. We're still going to be like, what? You want that? I don't want that. Like that, all that, it's not going to become like some big rainbow filled kumbaya, ship out, going out into the ocean. We'll still have to be human beings inside of it, but we will be human beings that have begun to undermine the encoded and internalized domination. Mm-hmm. That we keep recreating cancel culture as a means of trying to solve the fact of domination in our society. Mm. Oh, can I say one more thing? Mm-hmm. The short way is that we have to invoke, right, the aspiration for our own liberation. Right. So we invoke liberation. We like, and that's not like maybe some people are like, what? Like, okay, now we're talking about, no, it's not woo. Like that liberation literally meaning like liberated, right, from the pressure of domination that calls us to operate from domination. So that pressure of domination actually causes us to be complicit with domination because we can't see any other way out of it. And so by wanting to be free of that, wanting to be free of domination on us and in us, right? Because we can't see it on us if we don't see it in us, wanting to be free of it, then right, that we're kind of like on the new spiral where we're heading, we're going someplace.
Mm-hmm. It's wonderful. I think often about just the challenge of, I don't know if this is true for you, but English is my primary language. I don't speak some other language. And learning, I think of this all the time, that in many indigenous cultures, there are 70% verbs to 30% nouns. In English, we have reversed that. We have 70% things and 30% we recognize as process, and how there's a certain kind of domination built into our language. So I'm loving when you're bringing these creative words. Like I feel like we have to reinvent how to speak about it in order to let ourselves see other than the horizontal or vertical lines we've been conditioned with. Yeah, it's a long game.
And you know, I would just say that that was a real, I mean, I had to like practice and lots of things. And, you know, I don't know, maybe it was 8 or 9 years ago. It was also something about indigenous language that I learned from 2 different directions, that there were mostly no words for possessive. Right. And I tried to operate in my daily life without possessing things. Right. And my mind was just like blown apart. I was like, oh, so talk about domination, ownership, right? The notion that one person was saying, we don't say, our Mother Earth. It's just Mother Earth. It's not our Mother Earth. There's not. And so if you don't own everything, including people, it really changes how you are in relationship with plants and trees and, and animals and land and where you live and how your feet move if you don't own it. Yeah. And if you're not, and when there's ownership, there's also like a compulsion to try to acquire. Mm-hmm. So, we're now, right? Like now we're all down, even your children, right? Your children, we're owning our children. And if your children are simply they're simply of nature, then our relationship to children has to necessarily change because they're their own being. Mm-hmm. Right? The only thing that we can really possess and actually those both Cherokee and Lakota is ourselves. Mm-hmm.
I want to jump on the linguistic bandwagon here. Thank you so much for saying that, both Aaron and Rev. I mean, it just reminds me that the language we use and the definitions of that language highlight something that's hard to see, which is the perceptual lens to how we are seeing the world. Right. And that perceptual lens gives us an insight into the way we experience the reality of the world. And so sometimes it is so hard to see those layers of power dominance that have been embedded within us. And there are ways to sneak in. And one of the ways to sneak in that I find is language, is questioning our words and our definitions. Like both of you were sharing. And you can't question your own, find some friends who can. And that's something I also want to just name, that you were talking about, what are the ways in, the tools. And in the same way that I was talking about activation is contagious, so is liberation. And those who have gone through the process, or we're all in process, but those who have spent a lot of depth and time in that place of liberation, and it is their embodied essence. Like you sit with Reverend Angel, I've sat with Reverend Angel, and it's just that transmission. It starts to highlight all the places you are still wearing the coat of domination, where you are still wearing the coat of oppression. And there are teachers like that. That's why we gathered as many of those teachers as we could for this program. Are like, what are the individuals in the world that are teaching this work, not just teaching this work, have embodied this work in a way that they can transmit it, which just goes to speed up the process. Mm-hmm. and helps us. It illuminates the entanglements, the our own aches, the projections, the all of these components that much more clearly and that much more timely too. I mean, it's still a lifelong process, but that's why we, in so many traditions, why we have a mentor or someone that we sit with, mm-hmm. so that we don't have to try to reinvent the wheel, because it's hard. Yeah. Ooh, it's hard.
Do you have one, Carl? I do.
I do.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, I love the timing of this training that you're offering, because we've been in this initiatory year of pandemic and all that's happened in this culture around race in the last year. And it's like there's a certain rawness and openness there. And we're also at the point of potentially emerging from this year. And I'd love maybe for each of you to reflect on, like, what are some of the seeds that you'd like participants to plant over these 3 months in people who are taking your training?
That Scott goes first. That's a seed.
Scott, you mean I think some of the seeds that it's hard for me to say because I don't want to impose. And still I have a wish. And that wish, I would say, is there's a way in which through the 3-month program that it would give a support and an anchoring that we were talking about before, an anchoring into a deeper anchoring into oneself that allows for that process of reflection and liberation. And it's not the hope that people come out of the 3 months as they're embodied or they're an embodied social activist or anything like that. But it's the sense that there's a community, there's a growing dialogue and conversation and practice that is embodied social justice, and that there are people in this collective process of liberation. And I just want to name so many traditions have already been in that collective process of liberation. And so this is not being reinvented. It's just being offered by a lot of folks who have done that work deeply. And it's moving and it's inspirational and it's meaningful to do that work with these folks. And it's never happened before that these folks have gathered in one place to offer that sort of unified transmission in a program like this. And it's really, I mean, I don't know, if anything, I just hope that people get the right to bathe in that.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Maybe that's my wish. It's just that people get to bathe in that, and what emerges from that bath, there's just so much support for that.
I think I opened with really what the seeds are that I want to plant. Those I trust the human heart. I trust the human heart when we are situated in abiding in our bodies. It doesn't mean I'll agree with everyone with whatever they come out with. And so similarly, I don't want to impose something. I trust that that I would much rather deal with whatever comes out of people's embodied expression than out of their disembodied expression, and I'm for that. And so that's actually all I want. All I want for people is that the willingness, right, that they express by even joining the program is amplified into an activation that becomes like a rigorous, unassailable, immovable yearning for one's own liberation. Whatever comes out of that afterwards, I completely trust.
It's gorgeous. Can I ask one more? I might ramble through this question for a minute, and then we'll see where it lands and what comes. But another something I reflect on often is what seems so deeply rooted in this culture, whether we were brought up religiously or not. As you say, it's just in the waters we're swimming in, is this, I know this from Buddhist language, of basic badness. Like, oh my God, either if I touch my own deep heart, or if anybody sees me, they're going to see I'm bad. And so there seems to be a profound then defensiveness against that, right? When we haven't deeply investigated that. And as opposed to, the language from our Buddhist tradition is basic goodness. As you say, I trust the human heart, not that we're going to agree, but that there's some basic goodness and intelligence in there. So starting with that, then I want to just share that, sometimes being in contexts of people getting together and trying to do anti-racist education can be a shit show of reactivity. Like, as you said, it's fucking hard. Like, I've had sleepless nights and like standing in the shower, like, writhing about like, God, it's hard. And so having been, going through this for some years, not a super long time, but I'm not brand new to the conversation. And I was talking with one of my dear friends who just has newly held a group for people engaging this kind of work. And she was blown away. Like, oh, I had no idea that every participant who walks in the door is carrying 8,000 tons of ancestral baggage and their current defense against their basic badness and all of this stuff. Like, okay, get ready to be in the mess together. So we were talking about it, her own, what's been struggling and what's worked well. And I said, through going through the ringer, I have come in the last, year or two to the point also in the deep ecology work I do connected with embodiment, also that if we are not coming from love for each other, for each other's uniqueness, for the earth, if it's not coming from that, it's probably going to be harmful actually in some way. And she said, another friend of hers said, oh no, maybe, I can't remember. Another person in our circle said, for me, the bottom line is dignity, that I have to be able to have my own dignity to engage in this process. And on another On Being interview I listened to in the last month, can't remember his first name, Berger, he was a student of Elie Wiesel. And what Elie Wiesel said was, I'm holding the line that no one will be humiliated in my presence. So I'm curious, like, as you roll into this, you have a stellar, both of you, what you bring and the people you're bringing seem like highly skilled. And it's like walking into the fire for some people, like, okay, so how do you relate to what I'm talking about, both with basic badness or love or dignity or, avoiding, how do I want to say, not avoiding, because reactivity can happen in that, but like, what's the conditions that lets it feed toward liberation and not just spiraling the drain together? I think that's the end of my ramble question.
Well, I want to start at the top. Is that okay, Scott? This is not a race training. So that's like, let's start there, right? That's not what this is. This is kind of a mind your own business, right? For the sake of the collective. Like, we're going to touch on different aspects of what it means to speak of embodiment, definitions, political history, but it's not so that we can now like get together and like work out our race stuff or our, stuff. So this is a really mind your business kind of certificate program. It's to get yourself together, right? It's like to get yourself and to get different perspective, lenses, vantage points into what might support and feed and nurture your own embodiment. So that's one thing. Yeah, basic badness, fundamental evil versus basic goodness is a very Eastern-Western split. I think for me, one of my big realizations was that, in the West, even as we hold to, Buddhism and yoga and all kind of Eastern cultures and perspectives, and we want them and we love them, we're actually funneling them through, basic evil, right? A fundamental evil. And so we aren't really situated mostly in the basic goodness that is a tenet of much of Eastern spirituality, not to create a false binary, but there is at least some kind of a course thing that we start out. Where we start from is not needing salvation, right? But rather to wake up to our own liberation. That we wake up, right? We just wake up to what is already so. So that's a very different trip, right? From there. I have to be and so basically my whole life is like scrambling to like be good enough. No wonder people are like just drowning in lack of worthiness, right? Their experience of themselves is like they lack, because we start out from a place of lack as an orientation, whether you're Christian or any other religion or not. Like, it is part of our social culture, right? It's imbued in our social culture that one has to become something in order to be considered worthy. And so the urgency, the not enoughness, that's the thing at the bottom. Scott and I were just talking about this the other day. It's like the bottom of the bottom of like the overwhelming number of people I talk to is like urgency, right? Everything that's lack of worth, right? Lack of self-worth, lack of worthiness is driving everything, driving urgency, driving productivity, driving killing themselves, driving smoking, drinking, drugging, sexing, male, female, marginalized, privilege, lack of self-worth. And it's baked in this system. Mm-hmm. So it's not your fault. And it's your responsibility, right? So this program is really about helping people begin to take responsibility, because we can't be held accountable if we can't take account. We can't take account if we're not responsible, and we can't be responsible if we can't feel. So if we can't actually feel ourselves, we can't be responsible for what's going on, because we don't actually know what's going on. We don't know it. We're just kind of coasting on some, mental frameworks that are, completely well, it's not just that they're like insufficient. They actually set up to keep us, cordoned off. And the last thing is, I don't believe anyone should be doing any DEI work, racial diversity, like any of it, without practice, contemplative practice, embodied practice built in. I don't even talk to folks. People are like, oh, could you do something? I'm like, if y'all willing to do some, contemplative practice? Yeah, well, it's too, End of conversation. So I don't actually contract with people to do DEI work. I can be asked, people will ask me to do some things with their organizations. I'm really a very strong interventionist, but I will never do it with any institution, any body, any corporation, anything that will not situate themselves in in a contemplative / mindfulness / embodied approach from as part and parcel of what this work is, because you can't feel yourself without it. And if you can't feel yourself, it is all a shit show. And I'm not saying that it's like pretty, but the sense of being able to tolerate ourselves because we can tap into the basic dignity that comes from that trust in our own being is critical. Without it, you're gonna find some point which you're gonna just start spewing on everybody.
Right. I love the ferocity with which you hold that, because also it seems...
That was my toned down version.
I love that, because I've also seen, I have had a long contemplative practice, and then entering some of these realms where it also can seem like anything that is spiritual is seen as bypassing. If you're not joining that contagious activation and reactivity. So just thank you. The sanity, the importance of what you're saying, I love it. Thank you so much. Scott, you want to add on to that?
That's weird.
No.
No, that was so good.
Oh,
Yeah.
I might say one piece though, because Rev and I were talking about, like, if you can scrape away the behaviors and the reenactments and the outward coping responses, and you just keep digging to the core, and you work within finding that core within the body of, like, what is it? What is it that's creating all of these things? And that lack of self-worth, the experience of not feeling seen, heard, recognized, or allowed to be in our authentic expression of that self. These sort of fundamental things that, if we spend the time on the periphery just getting really attached to the goop, you're kind of missing the essential support. And the idea of the lack of self or self-worth, we can so easily bring that back to embodiment, which is like lack of self. And it's not that there's ever a lack of self, it's just all of these ways in which that self has been cloaked and compressed and shunned and shamed and hidden away, because having to be told what our body is, or having to be told that we don't equal another human being, or whatever it is that creates the lack of self or lack of self-worth. And coming back to embodiment as the way that peels those compressions, those cloaks, those oppressive systems away to reveal that essence, that self that is interconnected with every single other aspect of nature. I mean, it's like if we took a forest and hid it, and then revealed, like revealed that cloak. It's like, oh yeah, this forest belongs to all the rest of the forest. Of course it does. We just missed that because it was cloaked. And so coming back to these essential pieces that are like, the lack of being seen, heard, recognized, the lack of self-worth, and just recognizing that there is such power. There is such power in this process of embodiment, of uncloaking and reconnecting, and it is contagious.
May it spread.
Yeah.
Good.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you both so much. Just real honor and privilege to spend this time together and really celebrate the training and what you're bringing forth in the world. And I hope it spreads far and wide.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And I really appreciate the questions. And Erin, when you were sharing, I was just like, oh yeah, I know that place so much. And it's part of the drive for creating this program, is that it's like we're out there with no life preservers, trying to swim in the shark infested waters of, 400 years, 800 years, depending on, thousands of years, depending on what domination you're talking about, of trying to claw back some space for our aliveness, and doing that without some kind of essential support is really just madness.
Yeah,
it's really madness, and as you said, it is harmful. Mm-hmm. I think we create more harm, and we set ourselves up for people never wanting to touch the work of trying to be made whole again.
Right.
Because it's harm. Scott and I talk about the difference between hurt and harm.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be hurt while we navigate, difference and privilege and oppression and marginal. There's going to be hurt because it's hurtful. It's hurtful to know of it, and but we don't have to try to create more harm. Mm-hmm. We don't have to, and I hope that this program will, for many people, be a path to find their way to mitigate the kind of harm that is possible, whether you're in a privileged location, and whether you're in a marginalized location, whether you're facing the world from the realization that all of us are actually sit at the intersections of both privileged and marginalized, and we have the grace and the responsibility to allow ourselves to be fully human.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have to say one more thing before we close, which is I was out of town doing it at a little writing cabin in Taos, but Carl said he went to your introductory call for this training program, and among 300 and something people, he said he was counting, it was one of 5 white guys. So I'm speaking to any of our listeners who might also be the white guys to just say, you're warmly invited into this, right? Aren't they warmly invited to show up as well to the kinds of things that you're offering?
Yeah, so warmly invited. I mostly think white male in certain positions that are understood as privilege have been the most hoodwinked. Mm-hmm. And that is masked in our society, and it's masked in our political discourse. We just want to make the white guys the ones that have it all and kind of causing on the harm. It's no. What does it mean to position someone in a place in which they're not allowed to not know, not have control, not be commanding the space, they can just be in their body and not have their sense of, quote unquote, masculinity questioned because they're not dominating, they're not pissing on everything, they're not stomping on everything, they're not taking up the space. And doing that, taking up the space, doing those kinds of things have been shaped, in your bodies. And so that's why we're here to mind our business and not to shame people for the ways that we've been shaped, but actually really support people in the opportunity to do their own learning and start to make choices. So maybe you'll be dominating and maybe you'll be pissing on everything, but at least let it be your own choice, right? At least let it be your own choice, and let yourself be clear that you are doing this of your own choice, not simply because your race, your gender, your location has subjected you to follow a certain set of rules that makes you no less a part of a system that has imposed itself upon you than anyone else.
Mm-hmm. So good. So I just want to echo what Carl said. Thank you for your work in the world. So happy to talk to you today, and I hope we get to do it again. I feel like I want to hang out with you for many more hours.
Let's do it. Please come. Scott, thank you. Erin and Carl, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Erin, Carl. Thank you. Have a beautiful day.
Thank you so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you enjoy this podcast, it's great if you want to share it with friends or post about it on social media. Also, you could make a donation to support the podcast or find out more information about our classes and offerings at our website, embodimentmatters.com.